All right. So you're going to want to turn to Lamentations 4. There we go. All right. So I'm not going to show you the slides, of course. You don't have to show me up there. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those gray slides that say hope in exile. What I want to do though is, well, in my slide deck that I updated, I want to recap chapters 1, 2, and 3, but I'm not going to because of time. So what I'd like to do is start off, let's read Lamentations 4, because it's 22 verses. I don't think it'll take us that long. But I think then we'll be able to go right back to it. All the scriptures I have for the class tonight is from the NET Bible. That's the New International or New English Translation. So if it reads differently, it's very similar. It's not a off-the-wall version or anything like that. So let's just read through this and then we'll answer the questions. All right, and I'll just read I have a hard enough time hearing people talk because we're spread out and stuff. So I'll just read because I have the benefit of the mic, and I'll try not to go too fast. If I am going too fast, speak up and I'll slow down. All right, Lamentations 4. Alas, gold has lost its luster. Pure gold loses value. Jewels are scattered on every street corner. The precious sons of Zion were worth their weight in gold. Alas, what now they are treated like broken clay pots made by a potter. Even the jackals nurse their young at the breast. But my people are cruel, like ostriches in the street or in the desert. The infant's tongue sticks to the roof of its mouth due to the thirst. Little children beg for bread, but no one gives them even a morsel. Those who once feasted on delicacies are now starving to death in the streets. Those who grow up wearing expensive clothes are now dying amid garbage. The punishment of my people exceeded that of Sodom, which was overthrown in a moment with no one to help her. Her consecrated ones were brighter than snow, whiter than milk. Their bodies were ruddy than coral. Their hair like lapis lazuli or lazuli. Now their appearance is darker than soot. They are not recognized in the streets. Their skin has shriveled on their bones. It is dried up like tree bark. Those who died by the sword are better off than those who die of hunger. Those who waste away, struck down from lack of food. The hands of tender-hearted women cook their own children, who became their food, when my people were destroyed. The Lord fully vented his wrath. He poured out his fierce anger. He started a fire in Zion. It consumed her foundations. Neither the kings of the earth nor the people of the lands even thought that enemy or foe would enter the gates of Israel. But it happened due to the sins of her prophets and the iniquities of her priests, who poured out in her midst the blood of the righteous. They wander blindly through the streets, defiled by the blood they shed, while no one dares to touch their garments. People cry to them, "Turn away, you are unclean. Turn away, don't touch us." So they have fled and wandered about. But the nations say, "They may not stay here any longer." The Lord himself has scattered them. He no longer watches over them. They did not honor the priests. They did not show favor to the elders. And I'm on verse 17 now. Our eyes continually failed us as we looked in vain for help. From our watchtowers we watched for a nation that could not rescue us. Our enemies hunted us down at every step, so that we could not walk about in our streets. Our end drew near, our days were numbered, for our end had come. Those who pursued us were swifter than eagles in the sky. They chased us over the mountains. They ambushed us in the wilderness. Our very life breath, the Lord's anointed king, was caught in their traps, of whom we thought, under his protection we will survive among the nations. Verse 21, rejoice and be glad, for now, O people of Edom, who reside in the land of Uz. But the cup of judgment will pass to you also. You will get drunk and take off your clothes. O people of Zion, your punishment will come to an end. He will not prolong your exile. But O people of Edom, he will punish your sin and reveal your offenses. So that didn't take too long. All right, so questions. What is, going back, we're going to talk about verses 1 through 11. What is the imagery of the sacred stones being poured out on the streets in verse 1? What's that imagery of when Jeremiah is writing this? What is he seeing?
There's no value in the gold.
Right? Well, you're absolutely right. Now he's saying, hey, the gold that was there, it's tarnished, it's dark, it's stained. Verse 2, we're going to get to that part of it. Essentially, think of, if you think back how when Solomon built Jerusalem, built the temple, David wasn't allowed to build the temple, right, for God, because he had blood on his hands. He was the king of battles, right? So God told him, no, he can't do it, but he wanted to build the temple. Solomon said, my father, or God and his dad, David, made the border secure. So he was able to reach out and bring in great cedar trees. The Jews gave offerings of gold. They were well taken care of. God took care of them. So they built this beautiful city, something that was thought to be impenetrable. We'll get to that later. And what Jeremiah is seeing is ruins. If we could see the slide, Paul has the picture of, it looks like New York, or has been demolished. It would be like that. He's come to the city and there's rubble everywhere. It's just devastated. I personally think about something like nowadays would be the aftermath of a tornado going through. We've had a few down in Tennessee just recently and around. So we're actually going to be getting into tornado season. But that's what I think of for aftermath for us, because we don't have war over here. It's more storms. But it's the sacred stones are the jewels, the things that were taken from when the Babylonians came in. They raided, right? They had 3 times they were in the city, and this last time they took everything. There was nothing. They even left the poorest people in the city, along with some ritzy people who were suffering, and we'll get to them. 3 Hebrew terms are used in verses 1 and 2 to identify the gold that had been plundered. General term, gold, pure gold, and fine gold, all are now viewed as being stained, dark, and changed. The gold has lost its value. Okay. The sacred stones and the structure of the temple are depicted as poured out. The sacred stones were from structures that had been precious to the Jews, structures that had been reduced to rubble, with scattered pieces disrespectfully thrown in the streets. So, I mean, when they came through, they, rampaged everything, just destroyed everything. There was nothing left. Okay, so now we're getting to verse 3. What is the purpose of the reference to jackals and ostriches? Jackals and ostriches. I mentioned it last Wednesday. You're talking to jackals? Or? Well, ostriches are a beast all by themselves. I didn't know this about ostriches. And so if we turn to Job 39, we'll learn about the ostriches. But the jackals, they suckle their offspring until they're big enough to grow and be on their own. But in this case, the moms weren't even able to because of starvation. To the point where, as Paul, it was mentioned in chapter 3, that the moms boiled their children, for food. But we learn about the ostriches in Job 39, verse 13 through 17. It says, "The wings of the ostrich flap with joy, but are they the pinions and the plumage of a stork? For she leaves her eggs on the ground and lets them be warmed on the soil." You guys, some of the verses say dust or desert. "She forgets that a foot might crush them, and that a wild animal might trample them. She is harsh with her young as if they were not hers. She is unconcerned about the uselessness of her labor. For God deprived her of wisdom and did not impart understanding to her." Mother ostriches seem unconcerned about their young, essentially, is the idea here. And that's pretty much how the moms, they had their kids, but they were so devastated they didn't have food for themselves, let alone to produce anything that they could give to their children. And then they wound up, as we found out, they ate their own kids because of it. And that's where that connection, that comparison is with ostriches and jackals. Okay? What is the statutes of Jeremiah's people in, or what is the status, not statutes, what is the status of Jeremiah's people, verses 4 through 5? Right, they're hungry. What were they like beforehand?
Wealthy beforehand, dressed in purple.
Yeah, I mean, they had everything they needed. God took care of them, right? Remember when they were coming out of the wilderness, going into the promised land? God told them that he was going to give them homes that they did not build. He was going to give them farms and things like that they did not plant. He was taking care of them. And at this point in time, the infants' tongues, as I mentioned, well, let's see. They didn't have anything to drink, nothing to eat, not even bread, and no one would share because they were hoarding things to themselves. Those who once feasted on delicacies, we're talking the upper crust people, they're starving to death on the streets. Those who grew up wearing expensive clothes are now dying amidst the garbage. They're rummaging through. I used to support an orphanage down in Mexico. They started the orphanage to help the kids who were literally living in the dump down there. That's how they were surviving. And I can imagine the same thing, but now they've got this nice orphanage and stuff. So it was nice to help with that. But they were literally living in the garbage. Their homes were made out of the garbage and the rubbish that was there. It was crazy. So yeah, they're used to being well-to-do. They're in a fortified city that had never been conquered. All right. So I have the social scene added to the sadness. Members of the aristocracy, who had been accustomed to living luxuriously, were seen wandering about the debris-strewn streets, seeking something to sustain their starving bodies. The idea is mentioned repeatedly. Paul's covered it in chapter 1, verse 4, verse 13, verse 16, and last week we talked about it, chapter 3, verse 11. In luxury, they reclined on scarlet couches, but now they embrace ash pits and dunghills. In some countries, dung is patted together to make cakes, and that's used for fuel to cook with and stuff like that. Buffalo chips, yeah. That's the same concept right there. So now, before they had everything provided, or, it was easy going for them. Okay, and that's the end of slide 1. It gives you an idea where we're at. Okay, slide 2, verse 6. All right, why has all this happened? Why has this all happened to Jerusalem? Sin, okay. What else? What more specific? What had they done? They were worshiping idols, pieces of wood. Growing up, I was told that, I always thought that was humorous, that they would go cut down a tree and make an idol. Then what was left of that tree, they would chop up for firewood. So to me, it was like, just throw the whole thing in the fire pit, right? I just never understood that. Jeremiah explained what had led to this conduct and lifestyle. The iniquity of my people, their sin was greater than the sin of Sodom. Okay, the people of Sodom were guilty of vile sins, Genesis 19, 1 through 29, and Jeremiah 23, 1 through 15, and Jeremiah 16, 9 through 13. But the shame of Sodom had been eclipsed by the rebellion of the city, once most favored by heaven. So the Jews had done far worse sinning. We don't, us under the New Testament, a sin's a sin's a sin, right? If I kill someone, that's just as bad as me lying. Or if I steal from someone, that's just as bad as me cheating someone, all right? Here, they were doing terrible things, just terrible things. Throughout the Old Testament, when it's talking about them, they were stealing, the richer people were stealing from the poor people, cheating them, and then like what Paul was talking about last week, how they shut their ears off from God. The prophets didn't listen to God and share what was from God. And what they did hear from God, they didn't want to hear from God. King Zedekiah at the time said that Jeremiah came and told him, hey, this is what God said. He said, keep that just between the two of us. I don't want anybody else to know about it. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a little later on this evening. All right. So it was sin that was holding them back, or that caused this. Okay. Would you rather die instantly? Let's contrast what's happening with Judah or with Jerusalem. Would you rather die instantly like Sodom and Gomorrah, or would you rather be pillaged and survive the sword? Which is worse? Absolutely. Yeah, you would want it. It's like pull off the Band-Aid. Let's just rip it off. Let's not, a little bit at a time. I learned that really quick when I was a kid. Just rip it off, Tried to do that with Sydney and Dylan. It's like, no. Then Dylan finally, he just got smart enough. He'd just rip it off. But yeah, it's better just to be killed and be done with it than go through the agony. Because part of these guys, they were hauled off into exile right off the bat. Some of them were killed by the sword. Then the others were left behind just to pretty much rot away, right? So what I have here is, let's see. Verse 10 is a reference to them cannibalizing their children again. Okay? But what I have here, cruelty of starvation, resorting to cannibalism. The time came when slaughter was preferable to starvation. Being attacked with a sword is a terrifying thought, right? I would be afraid of that, I think. But the slow process of starvation is prolonged with no prospect of recovery. The thought of being stricken is from a Hebrew term that means to pierce through. One stricken with starvation faces ongoing piercing hunger pangs. So you're reliving that starvation, that piercing through, that piercing pain every day. I mean, we would think 3 times a day, unless you have a snack in the morning, a snack in the afternoon. Depends on your eating habits, of course. But I thought that was an interesting point there. Okay. Next question is, we see the negative side of the nature of God, or it's more of a point, his anger. When we think of God, he's a loving God. We know he disciplines us. He makes sure that we're growing and maturing, right? But he does have an anger side. And he shows that in this, on how he dealt with the Israelites. I kind of put the devastation accomplished by the anger of the Lord is what's happened to them. It is sad that God had to go so far, because remember, he's told them, he's had his prophets tell them, hey, repent, and it'll be better. Repent, and I won't let bad things happen. Towards the end, the last conquest, when Nebuchadnezzar's taken Jerusalem, and we'll read about that in a little bit, as I mentioned, Jeremiah goes to him and tells him, hey, if you just surrender right now, walk out the door and surrender, God won't destroy the city and you won't die. Well, King Zedekiah was afraid, he didn't believe that, and that's when he said, just keep that between us, because he was going to hold out to the very end, and we find out later he's trying to sneak out the back door, and then they have to track him down and they capture him, and then all kinds of fun stuff happens to him. Unpleasant fun stuff, I guess, for sarcasm. All right. The note I have here, it is sad that God had to go so far before the people would honor him as Lord and turn away from their wicked ways. The degree of the destruction is seen in the statement that the fire in Zion has consumed its foundation. All right. Ezekiel, if you want to turn to Ezekiel 5:11 through 17. I'm going to read it. You don't have to turn to it, but I'm going to read it anyway. That's Ezekiel 5:11 through 17. It says, therefore, as surely as I live, says the sovereign Lord, because you defiled my sanctuary with all your detestable idols and with all your abominable practices, I will withdraw. My eyes will not pity you, nor will I spare you. 1/3 of your people will die of plague or be overcome by the famine within you. 1/3 of your family will fall by the sword surrounding you. And 1/3 I will scatter to the winds. I will unleash a sword behind them. Then my anger will be fully vented. I will exhaust my rage on them, and I will be appeased. Then they will know that I, the Lord, have spoken in my jealousy when I have fully vented my rage against them. Verse 14, I will make you desolate and an object of scorn among the nations around you, in the sight of everyone who passes by. You will be an object of scorn and taunting, a prime example of destruction among the nations around you when I execute judgments against you in anger and rage, fury. I, the Lord, have spoken. Verse 16, I will shoot against them deadly, destructive arrows of famine, which I will shoot to destroy you. I will prolong a famine on you and will remove the breed the bread supply. I will send famine and wild beasts against you, and they will take your children from you. Plague and bloodshed will overwhelm you, and I will bring a sword against you. I, the Lord, have spoken. That's pretty in your face kind of statement there, but that's just an example of he's warned them, he's told them numerous times, repent, and they just don't. We're going to see where it's their leadership, the prophets, the kings, the priests, right? That's the word I was looking for, thank you. They're the ones who did not do what they should have been doing, and they get their just rewards at the end. Okay, so now we're on slide 3. How's that? We're moving pretty good. All right. I don't want to take up too long, go too slow. So am I going at a decent speed? Okay. This is the sins of the prophets and priests. So that was a good segue into. All right. Israel believed Jerusalem was impregnable. Impenetrable. Sorry. Well, he has impregnable. Think of it. They had where it was located. Do you guys know where Jerusalem is located? It's like in a mountainous region. It's protected. I mean, it's a perfect, defendable location, and it had never been sieged unless God was behind the attack. The note I have here is other nations were surprised that the enemy could enter the gates of Jerusalem. This mountain city dedicated to Yahweh had gained reputation as an impregnable fortress. Not only had Zion's citizens forgotten God, but the surrounding nations had failed to consider what can happen when God sets his face against a city. I mean, think of Jericho. He told the Israelites, march around it, and the walls came tumbling down. I mean, Joshua, the only time they had problems conquering is when one of the Israelites had sinned and didn't listen. Same with Saul. When King Saul was appointed king, and they were constantly on the win until Saul himself held back and sinned, and then they started losing. So when God, or just one of God's angels is, there, you can't win, right? Thoughts on that? And I have a note here for myself. If time, read Jeremiah 21, 1 through 14. You might want to take a note on that. It just backs up this thought. That's Jeremiah 21, 1 through 14. So whose fault was the destruction? Whose fault was it for the destruction? Their own fault, right? We already said they sinned. That's why they were under this turmoil or this torment. So the primary interpretive point of the book of Lamentations is that the sins of Jerusalem's leaders, the leaders were the cause of the calamity. Prophets, priests, and kings had shed the blood of the righteous and the innocent. We get more information. 2 Kings 21, 1 through 6 is an example. 2 Kings 24, 3 and 4 is more information. Matter of fact, I'll use this because I don't want to lose my spot there. I'm going to look at 2 Kings 21. Got to get Haley's handbook real quick. So 2 Kings 21. And this is 1 through 6. Okay, Manasseh was 12 years old when he became king, and he reigned for 55 years in Jerusalem. His mother was Hephzibah, He did evil in the sight of the Lord and committed the same horrible sins practiced by the nations, whom the Lord drove out from before the Israelites. He rebuilt the high places that his father Hezekiah had destroyed. He set up altars for Baal and made an Asherah pole, just like King Ahab of Israel had done. He bowed down to all stars in the sky and worshiped them. He built altars in the Lord's temple, about which the Lord had said, Jerusalem will be my home. In the 2 courtyards of the Lord's temple, he built altars for all the stars in the sky. He passed his son through the fire and practiced divination and omen reading. He set up a ritual pit to conjure up underworld spirits and appointed magicians to supervise it. He did a great amount of evil in the sight of the Lord, provoking him to anger. That's just one example of, I don't know if you've ever seen a listing of all the kings of Israel and Judah, and you have a good side and a bad side. And it's like they'll go for a little while with all bad kings, and then all of a sudden you'll have one good one. It's like, wow, he fell far away from the family tree, didn't he? And then his son will go back to being evil, evil, evil. Then all of a sudden you have another good king. And that's what all these examples are. Let me go on. Let me read 24 as well. So 2 Kings 24, 3 and 4. Just as the Lord had announced, he rejected Judah because of all the sins which Manasseh had committed. Because he killed innocent people and stained Jerusalem with their blood, the Lord was unwilling to forgive them. So, we know that God is very patient with us, right? Today, one of these days, we've got all these, hey, you got to live your lives right. You got to live your lives right. Follow what God teaches you. One of these days, God's going to say, I'm done with you. And he's already told us what he's going to do. So are we heading that way? Eventually, that's going to happen. So just something to think about. I also have Jeremiah 2:26 through 35, similar example. And then Jeremiah 19:1 through 4, if you want to put that in your notes. Okay, so then we get to verse 15. Verse 15, they're going around. Let me pull that up real quick. Actually, verse 15. People cry to them, turn away. You are unclean. Turn away, don't touch us. So they have fled and wander about. But the nations say they may not stay here any longer. What is that? You may have, you're unclean. What is that? What do you think about when you hear that? Unclean. Leprosy, right. In Leviticus 13, we're going to read this. Leviticus 13:45 through 50. This is how God told them to deal with people with leprosy. So that's Leviticus 13:45 through 50. As for the diseased person who has the infection, his clothes must be torn. The hair of his head must be unbound. He must cover his mustache. And he must call out, unclean, unclean. The whole time he has the infection, he will be continually unclean. He must live in isolation, and his place of residence must be outside the camp. When a garment has a disease infection in it, whether a wool or linen garment, or in the warp or woof of the linen of the wool. Now, I don't know what that is. Anybody know what that is?
It's just the way one spreads the woof and one's the warp when it's woven.
Oh, thank you. So it's where the seam is, I guess?
No, it's the fabric itself, the way it's woven.
Oh.
One thread is the warp.
So like it's gotten into the fibers itself then. Okay, thank you. When I read that, I was like, I don't know what that is. I'm glad you did. Continuing, verse 48. Or in the warp or woof of the linen or the wool, or in leather or anything made of leather, if the infection in the garment or leather or wrap a warp or woof, or any article of the leather is yellowish green or reddish, it is diseased infection, and it must be shown to the priest. The priest is to examine and then quarantine the article with the infection for 7 days. And there's a few more things if you keep reading on how they're dealing with it. But the key thing is, if you were sick, so you didn't get anybody sick, first thing, they isolate you, right? You're out of the camp. But if you, as you're going out, you got to yell and let people know, make way, I'm unclean. And that's what these guys were having to do now, as we read. They're walking around because nobody wanted to be around them, because they had led them astray. The people had to cry to them, turn away, don't come around us. They didn't want anything to do with them. You're unclean. Why were they unclean? Why were they unclean? Thoughts? Well, the lepers, yes. I'm talking in this case, they don't have leprosy. Sins and iniquities. What were those sins and iniquities? They had killed innocent people. The blood of those people were on their hands. It was, they didn't literally, some of them may have literally had blood on them, but for the most part, it was the idea that you guys have committed such sin that your iniquities are all over you. You're just, we don't want anything to do with you. You're unclean.
Even if they didn't literally themselves kill the people were killed because they were led this way, and they were punished by God, were killed by the enemy because they were led.
Right, because they were in that position of authority, right? They're responsible for leading people astray. The prophets shut up their mouths. They closed up their ears. They didn't listen to God, or if they shared what was from God, the kings didn't listen to them. The priests should have known better. The priests, the Levites, were told and taught to teach and keep the Israelites faithful, and they didn't go and do their job. So, yeah, they were told they were unclean. They didn't probably directly do something, but indirectly they were responsible. And that's what's being called out here is the priests, the kings, and the prophets didn't do their job, and therefore they've been ostracized. All right. So that takes care of, now we're on slide 4. What's our time check? Paul's going to kill me. I'm not going to make it through. I'm just going to ask the questions, and I'll just make my points if that's okay. That way I can get through this so Paul can keep going next week. Verse 17, from whom were they looking for help? Paul mentioned it last week. Typically he refers to the Egyptians, right? They had made this thing with the Egyptians saying, hey, you'll come to our rescue. Well, God wasn't going to let that happen. And so when the Egyptians started on their way, they got turned around because the Babylonians said, oh, well, I'll just let you guys sit here. I'm going to go after them. And he chased them back into Egypt and thwarted that rescue. Jeremiah 2:16 and 19, even the soldiers from Memphis to Tahpanhes have cracked your skulls, people of Israel. You have brought all this on yourselves, Israel, by departing or by deserting the Lord your God when he was leading you along the right path. What good will it do you to go down to Egypt to seek help from the Egyptians? What good will it do to you to go over to Assyria to seek help from the Assyrians? So there's another area, another nation that they had tried to seek refuge with. And then verse 9 here, your own wickedness will bring about your punishment. Your unfaithful acts will bring down discipline on you. Know then and realize how utterly harmful it was for you to reject me, the Lord your God, to show no respect for me, says the sovereign Lord of heaven's armies. And then I've got Jeremiah 2:25. Do not chase after other gods until your shoes wear out and your throats become dry. But you say, it is useless for you to try and stop me because I love those foreign gods and want to pursue them. See, the tendency of the people was to seek help from other nations, and not turn to God for assistance. And that just added fuel to the fire. And he calls them out. They were going through famine. They didn't turn to God and say, God, help us. They tried to deal with it on their own. Okay, why could Israel not escape? Why is it that Israel could not escape this punishment? I'm sorry? They wouldn't listen to God, exactly. At the time the people, Jeremiah had long before prophetically described how they would respond as ruined people when the speedy forces came upon them. Jeremiah 4:11 through 13. At that time the people of Judah and Jerusalem will be told, a scorching wind will sweep down from the hilltops in the wilderness on your dear people, on my dear people. It will not be a gentle breeze or winnowing the grain and blowing away the chaff. No, a wind too strong for that will come at my bidding. Yes, even now I, myself, am calling down judgment on them. Look, the enemy is approaching like gathering clouds. The roar of his chariots is like that of the whirlwind. His horses move more swiftly than eagles. I cry out, we are doomed, for we will be destroyed. And I must have missed this. Why could Israel not escape? Because God wasn't going to let them. He had warned them so many times, and he told them what the results were going to be if they didn't change. Who would be the Lord's anointed? Verse 20. Who would be the Lord's anointed? So, who anoints the kings for Israel? Paul mentioned it last week. The prophets actually do the physical anointing. Okay, let me rephrase that. Who chooses the kings? God does. He told them, the physical anointment, like Samuel did Saul, right? Samuel did David. So the prophets normally, or the priests, would anoint the king, but God chose the kings. And he told them, the Lord's anointed surely is a reference to King Zedekiah in Lamentations here, the last king of Judah to occupy the throne. God was supposed to anoint the kings of his people. Deuteronomy 17, 14, and 15. When you come to the land the Lord your God is giving you, and take it over and live in it, and then say, I will select a king like all the nations around me, you must select without fail a king whom the Lord your God chooses. From among your fellow citizens, you must appoint a king. You may not designate a foreigner who is not one of your fellow Israelites. And then we have the example of God choosing Saul. That's in 1 Samuel 9, 15 through 17, if you want to add that to your notes. But technically, God, just to let you know, God did not choose Zedekiah to be king. He just happened to be the last royal person left that Nebuchadnezzar appointed king. And that's in Jeremiah 37, 1 and 2, where it reads, Zedekiah, son of Josiah, succeeded Jeconiah, son of Jehoiakim, as king. He was elevated to the throne of the land of Judah by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. Neither he nor the officials who served him, nor the people of Judah paid any attention to what the Lord said through the prophet Jeremiah. So, and I'm going to because now it's 7:51, so I'm going to let Paul pick up for verses 21 and 22, because it's kind of talking about the contrast between Israel and Edom. Because Israel actually has it light compared to what's about to happen to Edom. So I'll tell Paul to pick up there. Any questions? I know I went really fast. I can share my notes with anybody if they want them. And I've got a pretty picture of the slides so I can see what the slides are too. Go figure. So if there are any questions, then we're dismissed. Thank you. Thanks.